Hello and welcome back to Anatomy, Comparative Vertebrate Anatomy. Today we want to talk about the human reproductive system, and ultimately when we're talking about any of the human systems, remember we also want to think about how that relates, how each of the structures and each of the function relates to all of the other vertebrate groups. So, reproductive system, the question is what does it do, and it reproduces, right? So the main function of the reproductive system is the propagation of the species. And while an organism can function without a reproductive system, it makes the individual evolutionarily null, right? Because there's no possible way that this individual can pass on their genes. And so it becomes a dead end. So the reproductive system, while not vital for survival of the individual, is vital for survival of the species, the population. Okay, now in order to actually propagate your species, two things have to happen. One, you have to get to sexual maturation, right? Sexual maturity, be an adult. And two, you have to produce gametes. Now, male and female structures, while they look different, come from common developmental tissues. And so they're actually what we call homologs. They start from the same origin, and then as different phases of development kick in for each of the genders, then those structures are going to form in different ways. But when you start looking at a fetus, for instance, then what you have here is at week 6, right, there's no difference between males and females in the genitalia, right? You can look at a sonogram and have no idea whether it's a boy or girl, and it's why people who are pregnant don't know what they're going to have, a boy or a girl, until at least week 12, because at that point you actually start to see some differentiation and you can see whether you're going to have boy parts or girl parts. Okay, and then this is just an example. This is at week 20. You have clearly defined genitalia. I mean, they're very different. You know what the result is going to be. But you can see through the colors what each part relates to, and I think that's actually really interesting. Okay, now when we look at the comparison, of course, we're doing the same things, right? We're producing gametes in terms of that, and we're producing hormones, right? The primary sex organs are called the gonads, and those are ovaries in females. We're going to talk a lot about ovaries, and those are testes in males. The singular for testes is testis. All right, and then these produce gametes, right? And those gametes are going to fuse to form the new individual, the zygote, and we'll talk about that when we talk about development. But ovaries produce oocytes, which are eggs, and testes produce sperm. Right now, there are lots of sex hormones that actually happen, that are produced through maturation and after maturation, and throughout the entire reproductive lifespan of each individual. And the big ones that you want to know are estrogen and progesterone in females, and the androgens, specifically testosterone, in the males. Okay? And then when you start looking at those homologs, this is just what each one does and how they line up. Because what we want to do now is talk about each of the reproductive systems. Okay, so right to begin with, each reproductive system is dormant until it becomes active during puberty. And at puberty, you start to get the external sex characteristics. Remember, we had the primary sex characteristics, which were the gonads and the testes. Now we're going to get our external sex characteristics. That's going to be breast enlargement for females. Fat distribution is going to occur in both sexes, but in different places. And so you're going to see that the shape of each of those bodies will change. Pubic hair is going to start to grow, and probably what pubic hair is for, because we've lost most of our hair, is it allows pheromones, right? A place to kind of move out into the environment, and then as the breeze blows by, because you get hair also in your armpits, and there are stinky places there too, but there are all kinds of pheromones and things that are in that, and so probably the hair is like, it helps it distribute into the breeze so other individuals can smell it. Anyway, the reproductive organs are fully functional at this point. Gametes are mature, and you're secreting sex hormones. Okay? And remember, both reproductive systems produce gametes, eggs and sperm. All right, now there's a huge difference in the gamete production. Females typically will produce and release 1 egg a month. Males produce billions of sperm daily, actually, and they're stored for a really short period of time, and if they're not expelled, they're actually reabsorbed, and the sperm, all of the stuff that makes up the cell, because sperm and eggs are cells, cell is broken down and used to build new things, probably sperm. Okay, so when we look at the male reproductive system, these are very complex, and we're just going to do kind of an overview of the big stuff. So we've got testes, that's going to be really important. There's the duct system, because you have to get the sperm from where it is being produced out into the female, right? And mammals internally fertilize, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on, the real big differences between external and internal fertilizing. But sharks do that. Birds do that, mammals do that, so some fish do that, but it's really important that you are able to deliver the sperm to the egg, which is going to be inside the female. And so you need that duct system, and you need the external genitalia to actually do that, and that would include the penis, and then the scrotum protects the testes and the epididymis, which we'll talk about in a minute, which is the part of the duct system. And then there are accessory organs that are going to produce all kinds of fluids that will help move sperm along, will act as lubrication, things like that. Okay, so the testes is where the important stuff is really happening, and there are 2 of them, right? And so you have inside the testes, you have little sperm factory, right? And then they're going to actually empty the sperm into the epididymis and the vas deferens. In other animals, it's called the ductus deferens, and that was true in the shark and things like that. But anyway, it's going to empty into here, and then it'll actually go up through the spermatic cord. Okay, so what you're looking at is here. It's going to travel up through the spermatic cord, and then eventually it's going to come back down and out. Okay, now sperm are actually really cool because they are cells, and they start out as kind of little normal cells. But what happens is they specialize very quickly, and out of the original cell, they only keep 3 things. They keep membrane, right? They keep mitochondria, and they keep the nucleus. And the nucleus is important because it's got their complement of DNA, okay? And then you've got this mitochondria that line up along the midpiece here, and this is the flagella, right? And so you have this little tail that is going to form, and the mitochondria produce ATP to actually turn this tail, and a little protein called dynein, which is one of the walking proteins. It's really cool, actually, and its function in a cell is to move stuff around inside the cell because it walks along the cytoskeleton of the cell. But in the sperm, it actually, as it pulls, it turns that flagella around like a little motor, and it's very exciting. And then here around the head, you have what's called the acrosome, and it's the acrosome that actually comes in contact with the egg, and inside the acrosome are enzymes and proteases that will break down the outer layer of the egg to allow for the nucleus for fusion to occur, and then the nucleus to be inserted into the egg. And it's a really cool thing, actually. Okay, now testosterone is the most important of all of the male hormones. It's produced in the interstitial cells of testes, and it stimulates the organ development. It is the cause of sex drive. It's also the cause of the secondary sex characteristics, right, of males, which include the deeper voice, the getting hairy, the enlargement of muscles. Men have, people often say that like boys fill out. That's the enlargement of the skeletal muscles, and their bones get thicker, whereas women's bones stay what's called gracile. Men's bones get what's called robust. And so when you look at 2 bones, you probably have a pretty good idea if you're looking at a male bone or a female bone based on that thickening that occurs. I also like to call testosterone, just as an aside, the stupid hormone, because oftentimes it's the underlying cause of the risk-taking behavior that you see in men, especially teenagers who are flooded with it. And so sometimes it can impede judgment, I think, is how that goes. It's definitely some of the underlying, because men are trying to impress women, and testosterone definitely fuels that. Okay, so, right, when we move on away from testosterone and all that, and we get to the epididymis, the epididymis is a storage facility, basically. But it's cool because you can get the muscles, or, well, I mean, it's cool because it's part of the body, and that's awesome. But the contraction of the muscles in the epididymis walls is actually what pushes the sperm into the vas deferens. And as it moves into the vas deferens, it's actually going to go by peristalsis, which is something that happens in several systems, but the male reproductive system, the female reproductive system, and the digestive system, because remember, food moves by peristalsis, and that's pretty cool. Now, this will dump the sperm into the ejaculatory duct, which is going to lead to the urethra, which leads out of the penis. And when a man has a vasectomy, you actually cut that vas deferens at the level of the testes, right? So you're actually going to cut it in the testes to prevent sperm from going all the way through the process. It'll stop it there. Okay. Now, there are seminal vesicles, okay, and you can see that that's right here. They're located at the base of the bladder, all right, and this is what's going to produce the fluid that the sperm live in. They are cells. They have to have nourishment, and so they're going to have sugars, they're going to have vitamin C, they're going to have any enzymes or hormones that they need to have, because they're going to have to survive until they actually get to the egg. Okay, now, prostate gland, I put this in here because it is important. It secretes a fluid that helps to actually activate the sperm. The sperm have to go through something that's called capacitation in order to become viable. Before that, they're just little cells, and they won't be able to fuse with the egg, but they undergo this process called capacitation, and that's where the sperm are activated. It's this fluid that does it. But the other reason I put the prostate gland in here is because men are subject to prostate cancer, which is something that is unique to men because women do not have a prostate, just like, unlike breast cancer, which both men and women can get. Women obviously get it more than men, but men can get that. But women do not have a prostate, so this does not happen for women. But prostate cancer is a very common thing in men, so I thought that you might want to know what it does. Okay, now the external genitalia, this is going to be the penis, and most of the time it's soft and not doing anything, but there's spongy tissue that will fill with blood, and that's what allows the penis to become a sperm delivery device to get inside of the female. Okay, and then the scrotum is really interesting. Humans are the only mammals that have the really soft, tender, vital part of the reproductive system, the testes, outside of the body. And the reason this is happening is the sperm do not do well at normal body temperature. They need to be a little bit cooler. And so the scrotum allows those testes to be outside of the body and be cooler so they are viable to keep them healthy. Okay, and this is what it looks like all put together. And then here's the bladder back here, just so you know, because we're going to compare that, of course, to the female bladder. And males only have one exit, and that's actually through the penis. And so the sperm and both urine come out through that. All right, and then this is just a side view, so you can see where everything is. Here's the bladder, right? And so then here's the testes and everything. Oh, and this, right, is the rectum from the digestive system. Okay, now let's talk about the female system, all right? So when you start out, the urinary bladder is actually off to the side, whereas in men it was in the center, right? And so in females it's going to be off to the side. But here is our system. It looks like it's a little bit simpler, and it does actually have fewer parts, but it is just as maybe more complex, because we have that whole, series of hormones that we have to have. We secrete the egg and all this good stuff. So, there's that. Our reproductive system is the ovaries, the duct system, because again, we've got to get the egg from the ovaries into the fallopian tubes, then into the uterus, and so that's important. And then we have also the vagina, right? And then the external genitalia, and we'll talk about each of those. So the vagina is going to be this part. It's the inner tube, right? Sometimes it's called the birth canal. And this is the receiving location for the penis, and then the sperm is actually going to come up through the cervical canal, right? Okay. And then here is the external genitalia. And the reason that I have this in here is just to show you that male mammals have two exit points, right? One for the digestive system and then one for the reproductive and urinary system. But females have three, right? We have exclusive exit points. And so we have one for the urinary system, and that's the opening of the urethra. We have one for the reproductive system, and that's the opening of the vagina. And we have one for the digestive system, which is the anus, right? And then all of the rest of these tissues are to protect these two openings right here. Okay. Now, all of these things have to be supported within the body because remember, the male system, most of it is actually outside the body, but ours is inside, and so we have lots of ligaments that have to hold this in place. And so we've got this broad ligament right here that's actually going to hold the fallopian tube and the ovary in place, and it's going to keep the fallopian tube close to the ovary, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. You're going to have the ovarian ligaments, which are going to actually hold the ovary in place in relation to the uterus. You've got the suspensory ligaments, which are back here, going to actually hold the ovary in place in relation to the wall of the pelvis area, inside the cavity, pelvic cavity. And then you have the round ligaments right over here, and these are going to secure the uterus. And these are going to be really, really important when a female gets pregnant and the uterus starts to expand and get heavy and stretch and all this good stuff. Those round ligaments are going to secure that and keep the uterus from dropping lower, because that would be bad. Okay, and it does happen sometimes, but that would be bad. Okay, so fallopian tubes, oviducts, uterine tubes, uterine horn, those are all the same thing. Okay, so those are just different names for the same thing. And that's going to be this, right? The uterine, fallopian tube, oviduct, whatever. The fundus of the ovary is the top right here. And these actually attach to the uterus, but they do not attach to the ovary, which means that the egg that's released from the ovary has to jump the gap between the ovary and the entrance to the fallopian tube. And to help this happen, there are fimbriae, which are these finger-like projections. You can see them here, and they kind of waft the egg into the opening, right? And so that helps it get there. And then inside the fallopian tube are these cilia that move the egg all the way down. And fertilization is actually going to occur inside the uterine tube, right? And it's going to occur right about here. And this means that the sperm has to come in all the way up through here into the fallopian tube and then meet the egg here. Okay, so uterus. This is the baby holder, right? And so this is the point of the uterus, is to provide a place for the baby and the placenta, right? Because mammals, and we're mammals, are placentals. And this is why the uterus in mammals looks very different from the uterus in the external fertilizers like sharks and mud puppies, which is really, the uterus is kind of like a thin sac. For mammals and birds, well, for mammals, you're going to have this really thick muscular uterus because the offspring is going to be inside of that for the period of gestation, which we'll talk about later on. And then it's going to have to be pushed out. So these have to be really strong muscles, because it's the muscle contractions as the fundus contracts down that's going to push that baby out. Yeah. So there's a little bit about the uterus. Okay. All right. And then here is just kind of the overall picture. And we're going to talk about ovaries in just a minute. But when you look at it, you can see there are the three layers of the uterus. And then the perimetrium, the broad ligament is actually a fold of the perimetrium, and that's kind of cool because it's like, dual purpose. All right, and then this is it from the side. You can actually see that the uterus is folded over. So here's the rectum, right? Here's the bladder, here's the urethra, and then here's the uterus, and it's kind of just like this little fold. It's very tiny, and here's the ovary sitting on top of it. When there is a baby in this and it starts to grow, this becomes huge, like ball right here, and squishes the bladder and squishes the intestines and all that stuff. Now, the ovaries are where the eggs happen, okay? And ovulation is when the egg is released, right? And so the ovary is filled with these follicles that are these sac-like structures. You can kind of imagine them as egg holders, right? As if this were an egg carton. The follicles are the little, divots that you put the eggs in. And this is all driven by hormonal changes, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But here you have the follicle, right, and it's growing and growing and growing. And then you have, here's your little oocyte, then it ruptures, the egg is released, that's during ovulation, and then this tissue is transformed into what's called corpus luteum, and then it degenerates. And so that's the cycle for each of the follicles. Okay. Now, the two big hormones that are produced by the ovaries are going to be estrogen and progesterone, okay, and that should say estrogen, not estrogens, sorry about that, produced by the follicle cells. Estrogen is the thing, it's like the homologue, if you will, of testosterone. It's not, because it's not a structure, but it's the counterpart to testosterone. It's what gives women secondary sex characteristics. You get the enlargement of the accessory organs, development of breasts, you get hairy, right? Fat. We get an increase of fat. Males get a redistribution of fat. We just get more, and it's aggregated in certain areas. The hips, the breasts, that sort of thing. We also have a widening of our pelvis, and that's so we can get the baby's head through it when we get pregnant. And then, of course, menstruation. And this is something that men don't do because they're producing sperm all the time. So we have this very complex cycle that allows us to release the eggs. Now, the progesterone is produced by the corpus luteum, so this is the thing that signals that all of this is over. Its production will continue until luteinizing hormone is going to diminish in the blood, and we'll talk about that when we talk about menses in just a second. This helps maintain pregnancy, by the way. So when a woman gets pregnant, a female gets pregnant, it's the progesterone that keeps that pregnancy from going and doesn't start sort of an injection process. Okay, now your menstrual cycle is this change in the ovary and the release of the egg and all this good stuff. And the stages are the menses, which is where you are sloughing off this layer, the functional layer, which is mostly blood, right, to supply the egg until the placenta is built. Because the egg has to supply nutrients for itself for a little bit, and then this blood layer is nice and cushy, and the egg will anchor into it, and the placenta will form and all this good stuff. But if you're not anchoring the egg, it's just sloughed off, right? And then during the proliferative stage, that layer is regenerated. And during the secretory stage, this is where you are having the endometrium. It's increasing in size. It's readying for the implantation. I'm going to show you a graph of this. Menopause is when all of this stops happening, okay? So you've got ovulation and then menses. And then menopause is when it's not happening, okay? And it's about 28 days, yeah? So here is the menstrual phase, right? Here's you're dumping all that blood. Then you start the proliferative phase, right? And you're more secretory phase. And at the end of that, all of the blood is sloughed out, okay? And then here are the hormones as you go through there. Now, their pituitary hormones are the luteinizing hormone and the follicle stimulating hormone, which we'll talk about in a second. And then you can see here's the peak of the estrogen, and then you have the progesterone, which is a little bit later, yeah, after the egg is released. Okay, and then here it is when you put it all together. Here's ovulation, picked off by estrogen and the luteinizing hormone, and then here's progesterone after it's done. Okay, and you have another little peak of estrogen, but it's progesterone that's going to be the big one. Okay, all right. Now, testosterone. Right, we talked about that. These are all of the hormones that are going to be involved. The major hormones that are going to be involved. Okay. All right. Now, the other feature that females have, that mammals, are mammary glands, and this is what produces the milk. And so this is the breast, and it is in the anterior thoracic wall, okay? And it's composed of all of these milk glands, right, or exocrine glands. And milk is unique to each species, and so it's why we don't always do well with cow's milk or other types of milk, because our milk is different. Just as a side note, we're the only mammal that continues to be able to drink milk as an adult, and that's because it is super nutritious, and so it's a great way to get nutrition. And so we're able to drink not only our own milk, but other animals' milk. Other mammal adults are not able to drink milk at all. Okay, now, the nipple is where the baby is going to attach to get the milk. Yeah. Now, the nipple isn't one single opening, it's a bunch of little openings that lead to the glands, and so there's several excretory ducts that are going to produce the milk. And then the areola is the pigmented area around the nipple, and probably it is a target, right? And so the baby who cannot see well can actually know where to go because the nipple is surrounded by the areola. Okay, and then this is of course what it looks like together. And again, you have these suspensory ligaments, so this tissue doesn't sag. But here are the milk ducts, the lactiferous ducts is what they're called. And then here are the excretory ducts, and you can see there are lots of little holes in the nipple. Okay. And then just here's a side view, right? This is the rib cage. Yeah. Adipose tissue, that is fat. So that's another area that we get fat deposits. Okay. Gametogenesis is the making of the gametes, and males undergo spermatogenesis, females undergo oogenesis, and both of these are meiotic events, right? So they're generated through meiosis as opposed to mitosis, and both of them occur after puberty. Men will continue to produce, although they'll produce less as they get older, but women will stop producing eggs after menopause. And males can produce up to 4 billion a day. Women do 1 per cycle, which is typically about 1 a month. All right, and here's just a reminder of mitosis versus meiosis. If you have seen it before, it's a review. If you have not, it's a quick overview. So mitosis, all of the cells in your body are replicated through mitosis. And mitosis is just the copying of the DNA and the producing of 2 identical cells. And they'll both have a full complement of DNA, right? In humans, it's going to be 46, right? And then the end product is going to have 46 chromosomes, right? You have 23 pairs. So, meiosis, to get gametes, you need to go through the same process, but in a sense, you kind of do it twice, because gametes are what are called haploid. A regular cell is a diploid cell. Diploid means that it has 2 sets of these chromosomes. So again, we're 23, so a diploid cell has 46. You need to have haploids that have cells that have 23. And so what happens is metaphase, the first part of meiosis is very similar to mitosis, but then you're going to have another event, but the DNA only replicates once. So basically it splits twice, replicates once, and so you get 4 little cells in the end. Yeah. And so we start out again with the 46 and 23, right? Actually, sorry, this should say 46. Okay, so we duplicate, these should each say 46, ignore that. Bad. I'll fix it on the one that you get. So 46, 46, and then 23, 23, 23, 23, and you can see that these add up to these. Now, these could all be sperm, right? And if they're all sperm, they'll all be sperm. Only one of these would become an egg. So meiosis produces 1 egg and 4 polar bodies, which are not viable in terms of like gametes, and then 4 sperm. 1 egg, 3 polar bodies, or 4 sperm, depending on male or female. All right, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the next class, and I will see you next time. Thanks.